And good evening, Leeds. Recent polls have shown that the Leave campaign is winning the argument as we fight to regain our independence from Brussels. And it's an argument which takes us across the policy spectrum, from geopolitics with the spread of terrorism across Europe's porous borders to job losses right on our doorsteps here in Yorkshire. As my colleague Jane Collins has mentioned, the catastrophic job losses in the steel industry could well have been avoided had the UK not been in the EU. Hamstrung by its devotion to green levies and carbon caps. This year alone, a fifth of the steel production jobs in the UK have gone. While politicians blame Chinese steel dumping, the manufacturers blame a multitude of factors such as high prices for energy, with the boss of the Tata Steel singling out crippling high electricity costs. Pro-EU politicians, including Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, were quick to hot-foot it to Scunthorpe, no doubt taking time out from Labour's Islington holistic lentil curry night, to shake hands with workers and tell them that had he been in charge, things would have been different. But how would they have been different, Jeremy? Despite your previous nod to Euroscepticism and your hard-left credentials, you've come down firmly on the side of Brussels. And in doing so, you have come down on the side of big businesses, lobbyists, and higher prices. For those of you who haven't heard or are aware of the EU laws which have dogged our manufacturing sector in this country, just let me run through a couple of key points. Firstly, we have the EU Emissions Trading Scheme, Directive 96/61/EC, which was set up to cut carbon and other emissions by limiting the amount that could be produced by companies in the EU. Its introduction meant that gases such as carbon dioxide could only be produced if companies paid for the right to do so. Since 2005, the amount of carbon the UK can produce has been decreasing, increasing the costs of carbon-intensive industries like steel production. Currently, Germany's carbon allowance is nearly twice that of Great Britain's. The EU has set a limit on the amount of carbon which can be produced by all EU countries, meaning that prices for energy will go up and costs for heavy industry will increase. So our companies will be uncompetitive and job losses will continue. Meanwhile, our government in Westminster is powerless to help without going cap in hand to Brussels to beg for permission to do so, thanks to the Lisbon Treaty. This poisonous treaty of ever closer union, which Labour pushed through Parliament and Just Call Me Dave broke his cast iron guarantee over, allows the EU to ban our government from intervening and providing British industry with help. As we've seen in Scunthorpe and Rotherham, by the time they've had their meetings, it will probably be too late. And it's the same story with an issue currently dominating the global agenda, that of terrorism and the threat we face on our streets. Following the devastating attacks in Paris, Western leaders have finally woken up to the threat posed by Daesh in Europe. Months after their leaders boasted they would exploit Europe's migrant crisis by flooding the continent with the murderers who are intent on bringing their centuries-old barbaric religious war to our shores. Those of us who warned of it were derided as alarmists and told we did not care about refugees fleeing civil war. Well, I do care about refugees, genuine refugees, who both need and deserve our help. But what we have seen in the last 6 months are streams of economic migrants exploiting the chaos of war in Syria to get to European states they have been told will be their El Dorado. Over the summer, I visited a number of camps in northern France, predominantly Calais and Dunkirk, and it was obvious all those months ago that the people smashing their way into British lorries and roaming the streets of Calais were not refugees, but people looking for access to our benefit system, in and out of work, and housing and healthcare. We even asked some of them why they were not happy to stay in France. Well, thanks to the Schengen Agreement, they are legally allowed to reside. We were told it was because they could not get houses or jobs or a free education in France. Now, I don't blame people for wanting to get a better life, but I do blame politicians for pretending that people trying to get to this country are all women and children fleeing persecution. And that the EU's open borders policy would not put lives in danger, while at the same time throwing security considerations to the back of the pile. And then Paris happened. A combination of homegrown jihadi terrorists and extremists who reached France by travelling through Greece, clutching fake Syrian passports and exposing the risks which open borders have laid us open to. And the EU's response? More Europe, of course. This time a common EU asylum and immigration policy and a new EU border force. We've also seen the EU propose a new directive on firearms, which threatens antique collections and museums. And let's not forget the renewed calls for the ubiquitous EU army. Another supranational structure that would see British troops brought under the command of Brussels rather than Westminster, and being deployed to conflicts without a proper debate and vote by British MPs. Basically, we've seen a whole raft of further steps away from national independence and sovereignty because of the EU's policy of treating every disaster, every attack, and every economic calamity as yet another opportunity to grab more power. I feel confident tonight in saying that I do not believe the terrorists who carried out the murders in Paris would have been deterred or hindered had there been EU legislation banning decommissioned firearms. This is especially true when you consider that once easily hidden arms like AK-47s can be illicitly smuggled into the EU, then move virtually anywhere in the continent without proper checks thanks to the Schengen Agreement. The fact is, the security problems we face will not be solved by banning 17th century muskets from some of this country's most prized collections, including the Royal Armouries here in Leeds, or by limiting crazed jihadis' access to decommissioned World War II revolvers. But once again, the EU prefer to ignore what needs to be done, like scrapping the Schengen Agreement and stopping Europe becoming an easy target for terrorists in favour of its own demented ideas on securing our population from terrorism. I wish I was being glib, but this is the actual line the EU wished to go down. We heard in Strasbourg last week from President Juncker himself how we must do everything to protect the Schengen Agreement, or the EU itself would collapse. Any question that people had come into Europe by exploiting the naive, security-lax external borders were ignored or dismissed. Maintaining the power of the European Union must come first, even if it is at the cost of innocent lives. So instead, just as we see with any other problems caused by EU legislation, be it steel job losses, be it high food prices, or be it terrorists being given the right of free movement, vaguely disguised as refugees, the answer from Brussels will always be this: it's not our fault. It wasn't our laws which let this happen. But let us make more, and we'll cure it for you, no matter how this impacts on your life. The fact is, we need our independence back. We need our armed forces properly funded and properly armed. We need our borders properly secured. And we need to bring decision making and democracy back to MPs in Westminster, who are directly, if not proportionally, elected by the people of this country. What we need is to believe in Great Britain. Thank you very much.